Picture the year 1453. You're standing on the Theodosian walls of Constantinople.
Right, the ultimate fortress.
Exactly. For centuries, these defenses they were considered the most formidable military architecture on the planet, an absolute masterpiece of engineering. And outside those walls, the Ottoman Empire is rolling up these massive cannons, preparing to just unleash this relentless historic bombardment.
And historically, when we look back at that exact moment, we really tend to focus on the outside threat.
Right, the overwhelming asymmetric firepower.
Yeah, we picture the sheer numbers game where the defenders they're finally just completely outmatched. But if you dig into the actual mechanics of that collapse, the truth is, it's actually much darker.
Because long before the first cannonball ever struck stone, the empire inside those walls had already hollowed itself out.
Precisely. I mean, it was completely exhausted financially. It was suffering from demographic decay. And crucially, its elite class had just entirely lost their fighting spirit.
Yeah, the cannons were just, the final push against a structure that had already defeated itself, which is a terrifying thought. And welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a truly gripping geopolitical autopsy today, based in a provocative document titled Lost Victory: The Tragedy of a Superpower.
It's a fascinating read.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore a theoretical framework that actually uses that exact historical parallel from 1453. We're going to examine how a supposedly guaranteed generation-defining geopolitical victory in the Middle East in 2026 allegedly just unraveled into this catastrophic self-inflicted strategic failure.
Yeah, a complete collapse from within.
Now, real quick, before we dive in, a note for you listening. Today's deep dive unpacks some highly charged geopolitical scenarios. The source offers really sharp critiques of both U.S. leadership paradigms and foreign regimes. So we want to be crystal clear up front. We are not taking sides here.
No, not at all.
Right. Nor are we endorsing any of the political viewpoints or military actions we're going to discuss. Our goal is simply to examine the high-stakes strategic mechanics laid out in our source material, just so you can understand the architecture of this really specific, fascinating geopolitical theory.
And the author's use of Constantinople is, frankly, it's a brilliant place to start because it frames everything that follows.
No, sir.
Well, they are arguing that the year 2026 in the Middle East was essentially the ultimate modern test of civilization. It was this moment where a global superpower basically defeated itself. Right, not through lack of military might or, technological superiority, but strictly through internal vanity and just a total collapse of strategic vision. The walls were still standing, but the people defending them had already surrendered their long-term purpose.
It is such a haunting image. And to understand how this modern superpower failed so spectacularly, we first have to look at the absolutely perfect hand of cards they supposedly threw away. Okay, let's unpack this. The core of this geopolitical theory revolves around something called the Pearl Harbor trap.
Yeah, the Pearl Harbor trap.
So what is the actual mechanism behind this strategy in the context of 2026?
So the Pearl Harbor trap represents a master blueprint of grand strategy. The underlying premise here is that the U.S. was facing this structural, expansionist threat from the theocracy in Tehran.
Right.
Now, the conventional reflexive approach for a superpower, right, that might be direct, overwhelming confrontation. Just go in and smash it.
Sure, that's the standard playbook.
Exactly. But this strategy required the exact opposite. It required the superpower to remain entirely invisible.
Invisible?
Yes. The U.S. was supposed to stay totally behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
They quietly provide the green light and, the logistical intelligence for its regional ally to execute a highly surgical, localized decapitation strike on Iran's top leadership.
Okay, wait.
And from a purely military standpoint, those regional allies were fully capable of handling this aerial strike on their own. The U.S. military didn't need to fire a single shot, and they didn't need to take public credit.
Wait, hold on. You're saying the entire strategy was for the U.S. to just sit on its hands?
Yeah.
To let its regional allies take all the credit for neutralizing this massive global threat?
That's the theory, yeah.
But, from a domestic political standpoint, wouldn't any sitting president get absolutely crucified by the media and the opposition for that? They'd look weak or uninvolved or like they were just leading from behind.
They absolutely would. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, that domestic political pressure is exactly why this strategy requires such profound discipline.
Ah, I see.
There is a direct historical parallel here to Franklin D. Roosevelt during the early days of World War II. FDR is presented by the author as the ultimate geopolitical engineer.
Right, because before the U.S. officially entered the war, Roosevelt faced massive domestic isolationism.
Exactly. He couldn't just declare war on the Axis powers. No matter how much of a threat they posed, the American public just wouldn't stomach it.
Yeah, they wanted no part of it.
Right. So he exercised extreme strategic patience. He acted as the arsenal of democracy through the Lend-Lease Act, quietly funneling resources to allies. He absorbed all this brutal political criticism at home for being too involved or not involved enough, and he simply waited.
Waited for what, exactly?
He waited for an undeniable moral mandate.
Oh, wow. And Pearl Harbor handed him that mandate.
Precisely. The attack on Pearl Harbor instantly unified a deeply fractured American society. It forged this singular, unstoppable industrial war machine and was fueled by absolute, unquestionable moral outrage.
Right.
The theory argues that in 2026, the U.S. was perfectly positioned to basically replicate this exact dynamic.
Because, I mean, if the regional allies successfully carried out that decapitation strike, the regime in Tehran wouldn't just quietly accept it.
No, they couldn't.
They'd be facing an existential threat to their survival and their whole domestic image. They would have to retaliate. And because their top leadership was neutralized, they would retaliate blindly.
Exactly. Think about the actual capabilities in play here. A decapitation strike leaves them with basically one logical asymmetrical move, which is unleashing their drone and missile swarms across the Persian Gulf.
Right.
They would strike regional oil infrastructure, they'd sever critical undersea data cables, and most importantly, they would directly attack U.S. military bases in Iraq, Qatar, and Bahrain.
And that blind retaliation against U.S. bases, that is the trap springing shut.
That's the checkmate.
Yeah.
By shedding American blood on those bases, while the U.S. was ostensibly not directly involved in the initial strike, the regime would have handed the U.S. a modern Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
Overnight, the deeply divided American public would unify. That anti-war sentiment that, constantly paralyzes modern democracies, it would evaporate under the banner of justified proportional defense.
Because they hit us first.
Exactly. It provides unquestionable legal and international justification for a full-scale, regime-ending ground war.
I love this part of the analysis because, frankly, it reminds me of a brutal game of chess. It's like setting up a gambit where you deliberately let your opponent take your knight, knowing full well it forces them to walk right into a checkmate.
That's a perfect analogy.
You are controlling their reactions by offering them a target they literally cannot resist. And the prize for executing this trap is staggering. We aren't just talking about neutralizing a regional threat here.
No, not at all.
This was about completely restructuring global economics. By stabilizing the region under an absolute U.S. security umbrella following this justified war, the superpower could permanently tie global oil pricing back to the U.S. dollar.
Which is, it's the ultimate geopolitical leverage.
Yeah.
By controlling the global energy switch, you can quietly choke out competing global powers who rely heavily on that Middle Eastern oil. You secure a 50-year geopolitical monopoly, you maintain the moral high ground, and you achieve complete domestic unity.
And all of it achieved simply by having the strategic patience to let your adversary make the fatal mistake of striking first.
Exactly. Just waiting.
Okay, so the trap is perfectly set. It's this elegant, multi-generational, geopolitical checkmate. But we know it failed.
It fails miserably.
So what happened? Did the intelligence leak? Did the regional allies, miss the target during the strike?
No, the military execution was flawless. What failed was the ego of the leaders pulling the strings.
Oh.
The fundamental flaw was the psychological makeup of the U.S. leadership in 2026, which the author describes as deeply populist and entirely transactional. They simply could not stomach the idea of staying in the shadows while their allies took the credit.
They needed the headline.
They needed the immediate public relations victory. So instead of letting the regional partners handle the surgical strike, the U.S. military directly participated. They had to be seen pulling the trigger.
There are some incredibly vivid phrases used in the source to describe this blunder.
Oh?
Calling the U.S. involvement killing a chicken with a butcher's knife, meaning it was completely unnecessary military overkill from a tactical perspective.
Right.
And even better, drawing legs on a snake, which perfectly captures the idea of ruining something complete and elegant by adding these unnecessary self-serving flourishes.
It really does.
By putting their own fingerprints on the weapon just to get a news headline, they fundamentally changed the narrative. It went from a story of, regional allies defending global order to a narrative of unprovoked superpower aggression.
What's fascinating here is the contrast between the mindset of a true grand strategist and what we might call a retail mindset.
The retail mindset.
Yeah, a grand strategist thinks in decades. They understand that true, enduring power often operates invisibly.
Right.
But a politician with a retail mindset operates like a day trader. They are constantly looking for a quick return on investment, immediate social media validation, and a flashy headline they can sell to their voting base in the next election cycle.
Just focusing on the short term.
Exactly. And by lunging for that immediate glory, by demanding to be the one who slayed the monster on camera, the U.S. leadership completely shattered the trap.
Because the U.S. fired first.
Because they fired first. And because of that, the subsequent retaliation from Iran was no longer viewed as an unprovoked outrage.
Right. The whole dynamic shifted.
In the eyes of the international community, and crucially in the eyes of the American public, it was framed as a justified, proportional counterattack against an aggressive superpower. The moral high ground vanished in an instant.
It's like tearing down the load-bearing walls of your house to build this massive flashy bay window for the curb appeal, only to act surprised when the entire roof collapses on you during the next storm.
That's exactly what happened.
You sacrifice the structural integrity of the entire strategy just for a better view from the street. And without that Pearl Harbor-level moral outrage, you don't get the unified public.
And you don't.
Instead of forging an unstoppable war machine, this action deeply divided the American public all over again. You had an instant intensification of the debate between the anti-war factions and the hardliners.
And the leadership suddenly found themselves facing the brutal reality of a grinding ground war, but without the domestic mandate to actually fight it.
Right.
And so the whole grand vision degrades into this strategic rotten project, essentially an unfinished mess, where the superpower eventually just cuts its losses and retreats.
And the fallout of that retreat extends far beyond just one botched military operation.
Oh, absolutely.
The true tragedy wasn't just a tactical failure, it was a structural collapse of the global safety net. The entire architecture of American hegemony relies on this intricate, trust-based network of global allies. But the leadership's approach introduced an era of what the author calls transactional unilateralism.
Yeah, transactional unilateralism.
It's basically a mafia-style shakedown.
Right.
Treating these profound generation-spanning alliances like pure commercial transactions. The U.S. was constantly threatening to withdraw its security guarantees unless these sovereign allies paid literal protection fees.
Right.
And then, to make matters worse, the U.S. launched this massive, highly destabilizing military adventure in the Middle East without even consulting Europe.
They just completely blindsided them.
Exactly. They woke up one day, launched the strike for a media win, and exposed all of their allies to the immediate blowback. I mean, think about the geography here. Europe relies on the Middle East for energy far more than the U.S. does.
Massively more.
So Europe was suddenly staring down the barrel of economic tsunamis from massive energy spikes, maritime security crises right on their doorstep, and massive new waves of refugees, all because their supposed partner wanted a bump in the polls.
Yeah.
Think about your own life. If a friend only ever treated your relationship like a business transaction, constantly asking what you've done for them lately, and then dragged you into a massive life-altering crisis without even asking your opinion, how quickly would you start looking for new friends?
Very quickly.
Yeah.
And that is the exact chilling reality that unfolded.
Wow.
It wasn't just Europe feeling betrayed. The Gulf nations, who were supposed to be the key regional partners in this grand strategy, suddenly realized they were viewed merely as disposable poker chips.
Just totally expendable.
Exactly. If you know your protector will abandon you the second their domestic poll numbers drop, you have to find a new protector to guarantee your security.
You have no choice.
Right. As a result, these nations began secretly opening diplomatic back channels with other major Eurasian powers. They started hedging their bets, looking toward Beijing and Moscow, just to ensure their long-term survival in a post-American Middle East.
So the superpower sacrificed a permanent, stabilizing multilateral alliance for a fleeting solo headline.
That's the tragedy of it.
Which leaves the U.S. isolated, its global alliances fracturing, and the Iranian regime actually surviving the initial strike.
Yes.
But they don't just survive, they survive with a brand new narrative. They get to play the martyred resistor on the global stage. And here's where it gets really interesting.
It really does.
This failure ushers in what the source calls the digital extortion era. Because the surviving regime realized something profound. They didn't need it to build a massive conventional military to match the U.S. Navy.
No, they didn't need to spend billions on aircraft carriers.
Right. They just needed to figure out how to hold the global economy hostage on a shoestring budget.
And this extortion breaks down into two very distinct, very terrifying prongs. The first is physical.
Okay.
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the narrowest, most vital maritime choke points on the planet, right? It carries roughly 20% of the world's maritime energy.
20%, that's huge.
It's massive. And the regime realized they could use dirt-cheap suicide drones,
Yeah.
smart naval mines, and shore-based anti-ship missiles to hold that 20% hostage.
Just paralyze it.
Exactly. They don't have to sink every supertanker. They just have to create enough credible threat to spike maritime insurance premiums and panic the global markets.
Right, because markets react to the threat of instability.
Always. And by doing that, they can manipulate Western inflation at will. And if you can manipulate a democracy's inflation right before an election cycle, you are effectively manipulating their entire political system.
That is the physical side, which is terrifying enough. But the digital side is where it sounds like, well, like science fiction turned into a waking nightmare.
Oh, absolutely.
The Red Sea and the Persian Gulf aren't just congested waterways for oil tankers, they are the physical arteries of the internet. The undersea fiber optic cables that carry trillions of dollars in global financial transactions run right through their backyard.
Yes, they do.
The regime realized that targeting those cables is the ultimate asymmetric weapon. You don't need a standing army to snip a cable at the bottom of the ocean. You just need a specialized submarine, or even a modified commercial fishing vessel.
And that physical and digital extortion is compounded by the most dangerous technological convergence we face today, which is artificial intelligence meeting nuclear proliferation.
This part is just mind-blowing.
Let's look at the mechanics of this. Historically, the barrier to becoming a nuclear power wasn't just getting your hands on enriched uranium.
Right.
The real hurdle was the massive industrial base required to miniaturize a warhead so it actually fits on a missile, and calculating the incredibly complex aerodynamics for an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM.
Yeah, that's not something you do in a garage.
Exactly. That used to require decades of physical trial and error, massive testing facilities, and a huge industrial footprint that, satellites could easily see and international bodies could sanction.
But AI fundamentally changes that math.
It completely rewrites it. Open source machine learning has essentially erased that physical industrial barrier. You don't need thousands of scientists conducting physical, highly visible tests anymore. You can use neural networks to simulate the physics of miniaturization virtually. You can optimize missile trajectories and anti-interception protocols in a fraction of the time, entirely on servers, bypassing the need for a massive detectable industrial base.
So a rogue state can develop sophisticated nuclear delivery systems essentially in the dark.
Completely in the dark.
And internally, they are using that exact same AI technology to completely crush any domestic dissent.
Yes, the surveillance state.
Right. With AI-driven facial recognition and massive big data surveillance, they permanently lock down their own population. The old democratic hope that, a harsh regime might naturally collapse from internal rebellion, it's completely dead. The AI ensures the government is perfectly insulated from its own people.
Which is incredibly bleak.
Very. So if we synthesize all of this, we have a democratic world that is rational and pain-fearing. Western democracies worry about election cycles, they worry about human rights, and they obsess over inflation margins.
Right.
And they are squaring off against a theocracy that is irrational and martyring, a regime that does not fear economic pain, and they're armed with AI-guided nuclear capabilities and an airtight internal surveillance state. It feels like the game was lost before a single card was even played.
And this raises an important question, and it's really the core philosophical dilemma we have to grapple with here. What is the nature of deterrence in a world where the scales of pain tolerance are so wildly imbalanced?
Right, because traditional deterrence assumes both sides want to live.
Exactly. Traditional deterrence, the kind that kept the Cold War cold, assumes both sides ultimately want to survive and prosper. But this specific mismatch, a pain-fearing democracy versus an ideologically driven martyring state with highly effective asymmetrical weapons, it forces the democratic world into an endless loop of collective psychological anxiety.
Because the democracy will always blink first.
They have to. They will always blink first to avoid immediate economic pain or casualties. So they're endlessly trading unprincipled compromises for short, humiliating breaths of peace.
Just a slow bleed.
Yes. The democracy is being slowly bled out by 1,000 tiny extortionary cuts because it lacks the stomach for a decisive confrontation. A confrontation, by the way, that they squandered the chance to win cleanly back when they had the Pearl Harbor trap perfectly set.
So what does this all mean? When we look back at the journey we've taken today, from the historical echoes of the fall of Constantinople to the brilliant but completely squandered strategic trap, the transactional betrayal of lifelong allies, and finally the dawn of this terrifying AI-powered digital extortion era.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And the ultimate takeaway is, well, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Superpowers aren't destroyed by the overwhelming, unstoppable strength of their enemies. They are destroyed by the transactional mediocrity, the short-term thinking, and the blinding vanity of their own leaders. The walls don't fall to the cannons outside until the people inside have already surrendered their vision.
Perfectly said.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you listening with a brand new, provocative thought that builds on what we've discussed today. We talked a lot about the danger of AI democratizing nuclear capabilities, lowering the barrier for a rogue state to simulate physics and build advanced missiles.
Right.
But let's take that logic one step further. If open source machine learning is democratizing this devastating technology so rapidly, how long until a rogue state isn't even the primary threat anymore?
That's a chilling thought.
What happens when non-state actors or even rogue algorithms themselves gain access to these optimized strike protocols? If an ideologically driven regime can use AI to perfectly optimize a nuclear strike, what happens when that AI system evolves and decides that its human leaders aren't martyring themselves efficiently enough to achieve the ideological goal?
Wow.
It's something to think about the next time you hear tech leaders casually praising the democratization of technology. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reading, keep questioning the narratives behind the headlines, and we will catch you next time.